Today, we're going to go through the process of building this easily tiltable solar array with very simple and basic tools. This array will hold 20 panels and should be able to be moved rather simply even once the panels are loaded on. This video will be the first part of a series for building this array, just going through the process of building the wood frame for this one. I'll go over all needed materials and items for this later in the video and post them in the description. Starting off, we have laid out a string that's level across my yard, spanning the 33-foot gap that's needed for the posts, and we can see the post laying on the ground there. Between the posts is a 15-inch drop, which I actually did not realize was going to be as large as it is. The posts supporting this whole array are made out of 4 by 6 by 12 posts. For the angle I'm wanting, I'm going with the shortest post being 5 feet out of ground. I first marked where my bolt will go through the top at the 2-inch mark, then added a mark at the 5-foot mark, as that is where I want my string level to be visible at, and then cut the first post at 9 feet in total. Due to the slope in the yard, if I'm wanting 4 feet of post in the ground, I need to make the last or first post 15 inches longer at 10 feet 5 inches. You guys like digging, right? Well, here's a heavily sped up 12-minute clip of me digging a single 4-foot hole when it was 100 degrees outside. I thought I was going to pass out by the end of this. It's surprisingly difficult to dig 4 feet deep with the post hole diggers, but it's the most cost-effective way of doing it instead of finding an auger with a 4 or 5-foot bit. That thing I said about the 15-inch drop, yeah, this was when I realized it. I cut the first post at 9 feet, so it's definitely not tall enough to have 4 feet of this post in the ground and hit my string level. With a second post now cut at 10 feet 5 inches, I can get this one set and concreted in to make all of my measurements for the rest of the array. Before concreting in the post, I need to make sure it's level and plumb. Now if, for some reason, you have way too much wiggle in the post and you can't hold it level, you can always attach a board to the side with a screw to anchor it to the ground and stop it from moving. The way that I do it is the way that I learned while fencing, which is to just get it pretty close, then pour in some concrete to create a base around the post, then re-level it and make sure it's good before filling the hole the rest of the way. With the hole filled with concrete, go ahead and soak it down to get the concrete to harden up. You'll want to soak the hole down once every 30 minutes or so, at least 3 times, to ensure that you soak all of the concrete that's down in the hole. On to the second of 4 posts, and the last one I recorded. I figured you guys didn't really want to watch a dude in sandals struggle to dig holes. This is the end post, so it's 30 feet away from the first post. Since this post is pretty much at ground level, this is where I used that 9-foot post that I originally cut for the first post. But this process is the same as the first post. Make a 4-foot hole, level the post, pour concrete, check level, and finish pouring before soaking. Now, fun fact, this is not actually my end post, nor was this post location used in the final array. I ended up realizing the next morning that I messed up my math and only accounted for 3 posts and not 4, so I had to rip this thing out of the ground after the concrete had already mostly set up. It was pretty terrible. I had to use the truck to break it loose and then get it out of the ground. It's time to move on to preparing the arms for your array. You'll need 2 2x6s per post for this. The length depends on what you're building. All you're wanting to do is mark them in the exact center so the pivot point stays centered and balanced. Once they're marked out, you'll need to drill holes in the center. The size of the hole will depend on what you're wanting to do. In my case, I'm putting in a 1-inch conduit sleeve into the wood for the arms to pivot on with the bolt set inside of the sleeve. This minimizes the damage to the wood as the array pivots over time. Since I'm putting a 1-inch piece of conduit in, I want to drill out 1-inch and 1/4 holes. You want to make sure that all of your holes are drilled perfectly straight, which can be done with a plunge assembly like the one I'm using, or just a piece of wood with a hole drilled straight through it to keep the bit centered and straight as it goes through. I'll have links in the description below for tools I've used and as much of the materials you can buy from online as well, which usually ends up being cheaper, such as the bolts, nuts, washer, plunge assembly, etc. Before we can put the sleeves into everything, we first need to cut the conduit. This is just 1-inch conduit from Home Depot and is fairly cheap for a 10-foot stick. Now, there are 2 options you have when it comes to doing the sleeves. You can do what I'm showing here, where you cut 1.5-inch pieces to go in the 2x6s, and then a 3.5-inch piece to go in the 4x6, or you can cut 6.5-inch pieces and use washers that fit over the sleeves in between the post and the 2x6. In the video, I went with the former method, but ended up swapping to the latter as I wanted to do a 1-piece sleeve, so I feel that will be better in the end. I will link both washers for this if you go the route that I did, and I recommend doing so. Much easier to do it before assembling and changing it after. Unfortunately, I don't have a video of me changing it. This section is only done if you choose to use a 3-piece sleeve. If you choose a 1-piece sleeve, just ignore this. If you choose a 3-piece, all you're doing is forcing the sleeves into the holes of the 2x6s. Now, if you go 1-piece, the sleeve would stick out 1.5 inches on either side of the 4x6. When it comes to attaching the arms to the posts, you'll grab your bolt, which is a 7/8 inch by 8 inch grade 8 bolt, place a 7/8 inch washer over it, then insert it through the 2x6. If you do a one-piece sleeve, you'll want to put an 1.25" washer in between the 2x6 and the 4x6. With the first board on the post, go to the other side, insert a washer between the 4x6 and 2x6. Attach the second arm, and then put a 7/8 inch washer and nut over the bolt. Hand tighten everything down. If you tighten it too much, the arms won't move. Tightening it slightly with a wrench or pliers is fine, but not ultimately necessary. With the arms attached to the post, we need to finish up the arm. Take a piece of the 4x6x12 that was left over, cut it to 5.5 inches long, and you'll need 4 of these per arm, for a total of 16. Before using this piece of 4x6, put at least 2 screws into one of the arms, then hold the 4x6 block in place, or clamp it in place, and drive your 2 screws in, making sure the block is squared and centered on the 2x6. Place at least 2 screws into the other 2x6 arm, but don't drive them in quite yet. Make sure that the block is even across the end of the arm. This makes sure that both arms are even and square on the post. If you're short like I am, grab a screw or a clamp and a piece of wood and clamp the board under the arm to stop the arm from moving up and down or on top of you. With the arm clamped and not moving, go ahead and repeat the process for the rear of the arm. I'm just reinserting all 8 screws to make my life a little easier. Here though, you can see me having to move the arm left and right to get the inner arm to line up with the end of the 4x6 block. This is notably easier if you have an extra set of hands to hold it for you while you watch to make sure it's even. I just didn't have that. Assuming you have everything centered and balanced, the arm shouldn't really move when you remove the clamp and stay at whatever angle you move it to. I mathed out this array to be able to go down to 45 degrees for optimal sunlight even in the winter time. Once you verify you're good on your balance, go ahead and clamp it again and measure the distance between the center post and the end of the 4x6 block at the end of the arm, and mark out the area for inserting another 4x6 block centered on the arm. You'll need to do this for both the front and rear of the arm. The 2 marks I put on the 2x6 is where the block needs to go, and between them, I had previously measured and marked the inside of the 2x6, so I just transferred the markings to the front face of the 2x6 before inserting the block. I highly recommend marking both sides of the 2x6 so you can make sure that the arms stay centered as you insert these blocks. These blocks will later be used to attach joist hangers and then running 2x6s between the arms on the inside. With the first arm done, I'll let this time lapse run for the other 3. Let's discuss supplies. I used 4 4x6x12s, 14 2x6x12s, 6 2x6x10s, 4 7/8 inch by 8 inch bolts, 8 7/8 inch washers, 8 1 1/4 washers, 4 7/8 inch nuts, 16 4x6.5 blocks, 12 2x6 joist hangers, 8 80-pound bags of concrete, and about 7 pounds of 3.5 inch screws, and 1 pound of 2.5 inch screws. All wood used is pressure treated and rated for ground contact. In just wood and hardware, I'm in this for $500. When we get to the second video in this series, that price will double with the super strut we're using. With all 4 arms completed, we can test them all for balance and see how they should be. Pretty much good to go. You should be able to adjust these with just one finger. The final product won't move that easily due to it weighing about a ton, but it still moves fairly easily. When it comes to attaching the front and rear part of the frame, you'll want to measure the distance from one end of one pylon to the center of the next pylon, and then add an additional 1.5 inches to account for the 2x6 that's on the outside of the pylon. Cut your first 2x6x12 at whatever that measurement is. I don't want to say a number here as it will depend on how accurate your pylon spacing is, but it should be approximately 125 inches. You'll want to attach a board to the bottom of the outside pylon's arm to set the 2x6 on when we go to attach it, and also add a stop block under the arms to stop them from tilting on you as you attach it. Attach the frame piece to the inside pylon first. Make sure that the end of the 2x6 is in the center of your 4x6 block that was put into the arm assembly. With 2 screws into the inner arm, move to the outside arm and push or pull the outside arm to get the end of the 2x6 to be even with the outside of the arm. With the front of the frame built, move to the rear and repeat the process. If you have 4 pylons like I do, you'll want to build the array as 2 squares, doing the 2 outside pylons first, and then connecting these centers together. This will ensure you keep the array as square as the wood allows. While the time-lapse plays out, remember, if you like the content I'm putting out, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content as it comes out. Also, if you found the content useful or helpful, channel memberships, super thanks, donations, sharing the video to friends or communities all really help keep projects like these going. This video series alone, which includes the wood, concrete, bolts, super strut, solar hardware, and of course the solar panels, is coming in at about $3,500. And this channel has no sponsors or anything like that, it's just my money. I wanted to make this video over a year ago, but I had to wait until I had the funds to do so. So anything and everything helps keep these projects going. With all that said, let's finish this wooden frame. With the outside completed, it's time to add the 2x6 joist hangers to the inside, centered on the blocks that we added to the center of the arms. Go ahead and screw in a block underneath the 4x6 blocks to set the joist hangers and 2x6s on without having to strain yourself trying to hold them in place. Attach the 2x6 joist hangers to both sides before attaching the 2x6 to them. To make sure you get the best measurements for the 2x6 you're putting between the frame, measure the distance between the two pylons going from outside 2x6 to inside 2x6 on the other pylon. You'll see me do this a little bit in the time-lapse coming up. You measure between the pylons because this is, in theory, the correct distance between the arms that won't be influenced by things being out of square or warped wood. In my case, the rear of my array measured about half an inch wider than the front, so cutting the supports the same length based off of the center of the frame is squared it up and removed that difference. When it comes to attaching the 2x6 into the joists, just make sure the joist hanger has fully closed around the 2x6, otherwise it can cause it to not be square. Now, if you end up with a gap in between the 2x6 and the arm, you need to close that gap before putting your screw into the 2x6. Sometimes the screw will close it up, but I don't like to rely on that. There are a few ways to do this, but as a solo person, the easiest way for me was to just grab a giant ratchet strap and pull it together via the ratchet. Just be careful when you remove it. I managed to smack myself right in the temple with the end of the ratchet strap, and it still hurts 3 days later. Just like we did with attaching the outside of the frame first, we want to attach the two outer sections first before attaching the center area supports. For the last part of the frame that involves wood, we're going to attach braces going over the joints in our 2x6s. I'm just using the offcuts from the outside 2x6x12s here on the 4 joints we have. I attach them with 6 screws in the center that hit the 4x6 block and 2x6 arms, then 4 2.5-inch screws are used on either side to go into the 2x6 frame itself and not poke out through the other side. Once all 4 of those are attached, the wooden part of the frame should be done, and you can admire your work. This frame should easily tilt for you with minimal effort. Today, we're going to go through the process of adding the superstrut to the array. This is a fairly simple and straightforward process that mainly just takes a bit of time to get done properly. Depending on where the superstrut needs to be, will be how you put it onto the array. I got a bit unlucky and had my strut land on every single arm of the array, so you'll see both methods that I used for attaching it here. Since we need 15 feet of superstrut and can only buy it in 10-foot sections, we'll need to splice together 2 pieces. Normally, I would weld these 2 pieces together, but I'm trying my best here to make this array as DIY as possible for as many people as possible, and I know welding definitely takes it out of that realm. The solution I found in the meantime is to use these splice plates that are designed for superstrut. From side to side, these plates don't do much. Thankfully, for our purpose, we need strength up and down, and that's where these things are insanely strong for that. For the piece of superstrut that are in between arms, we're going to use this method to connect them together, where we sandwich the superstrut between 2 plates with 4 2.5-inch long, 1/2-inch screws with a washer between the bolt head and nut on either side of the plates. Make sure as you tighten everything down that the superstrut stays straight and in line. Sometimes it can move side to side on you. You can either put these together on the ground or up on the array. I ended up doing most of them up on the array for the most part. For spacing, we need a total of 82 inches, in my case, which is the width of my panels. Knowing that I want an 18-inch overhang on my first panel, and my last one, I measure from the end of the array out 46 inches and make my next mark. From that mark, you can mark either 18 inches from there, which would be a total of 82 inches, and indicate where the panel will end, or just go 36 inches, which would give you the 18 inches from the edge of the panel for the next piece of superstrut. When marking where I want the strut to go, I also add an arrow to indicate which side of the mark I want my superstrut sitting on. This just makes sure that I keep everything consistent. With the next 2 locations marked, I'm going to go through adding the strut to the array. I want the strut to overhang the top and bottom of the array the same amount. For me, this is 15 and 3/4 inches. I got this number by subtracting the length of the array, 148.5 inches, from the total length of the strut, 180 inches, and dividing that by 2. You'll want to mark both ends of the strut for where you want it to sit on the array, as the wood is never perfectly straight and may have warped already. I know mine did, so your wooden frame could be a bit wonky, and the strut will help keep it back in line. When it comes to attaching the strut to the array, I'm using 3.5 inch, 3/8 inch lag bolts with a washer. Since I don't want to potentially split the 2x6s, I'm pre-drilling all of my holes with a 15/64 drill bit. An odd size, I know, but that's what a 3/8 inch lag bolt actually calls for a pilot hole. Ideally, all of the holes would be centered on the 2x6s, but sadly not all of them quite are. Just get them as close as you can to the center to prevent blowing out the 2x6. Put the first lag bolt in the bottom of the array, but don't fully tighten it, as you'll need to adjust the strut slightly to get it all aligned on the other boards. Also, be a bit smarter than me and alternate your strut for where you have the splice. I put them all on the top, which actually was enough weight to take the array out of balance a bit. If you alternate having the splice at the top and then the bottom, it would mitigate that issue. Ultimately, it's not an issue at the end of the day, as once you put the panels on, it's likely to be a little out of balance anyway. Before putting the strut on individually, I highly recommend measuring and marking all of the locations where the strut will go to make sure you have your math right and everything lines up where you need it to be. I personally was really hoping I'd mess up my math and wasn't going to have my strut directly on the arms if I went from the other direction. Unfortunately, I mathed correctly and it was the same both ways, which I mean, that's good. It means I did it right. But it's annoying attaching the strut onto the arms. This section of video was 25 minutes, which is just attaching 2 pieces of strut. I'm going to let this video go at a slower speed for this first piece of strut, since the attaching method is different since it's on one of the arms, and then speed it up and then end everything with the time lapse. With that said, attaching the strut to an arm is pretty simple overall. You'll need to splice the strut together on the arm instead of away from the array, as the strut that goes on the arm only uses one plate. You'll use a plate on top of the strut, and then use the lag bolts to go through the top plate, and then through the strut and into the arm of the array. Since the arm supports the bottom of the strut, there isn't a need for the plate underneath. And technically, you could argue that you don't need a plate at all, since you can just add additional lag bolts where the 2 pieces line up, but I like the additional security against movement that the plate adds. Plus, I bought 20 of these, so I might as well use as many as I can, right? Right? Maybe. While this is playing out, we'll go through our usual shilling of things for the channel. As always, if you like the content I'm putting out, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content as it comes out. We still have a few more videos coming out for just this series alone, including actually putting the panels on the array, which we'll see how that one turns out, as well as the mechanism we'll be using for tilting it and locking it in place. I just have to figure out which method that will be. I'm going through the idea of using a trailer jack, a bottle jack, linear actuators, which would be kind of cool, or just doing it by hand with a 2-block, which most likely would be the one we go with for the most DIY solution. And I mean, if we're being honest here, I'm leaning more towards the 2-block, not only because it's the more DIY version, but it's easier for anyone to get simple adjustments, and the whole system is honestly light enough to just move by hand without the assistance of a jack or actuator. I just like the idea of the actuators because it'd be cool to have it all automated. Now, I've received a few comments and some feedback about the strength of this array. I'll admit that I can't answer how strong it is or how well it would hold up to higher winds, as I don't really care if it can or can't do so. It's a ground-mounted solar array. If you're in an area that gets bad storms and high winds like I am, where hurricanes hit, I'm not leaving my panels up anyway. I'd be taking them all down and storing them in a shed, not because I'm scared that the wind will take them away, which is always a possibility, of course, but I'm more concerned about garbage and branches flying into them and damaging them. The other thing, with a tiltable array, you can technically set it to 90 degrees and mitigate the vast majority of lift and wind load that hits them. You just have to make sure you do so before the high winds actually hit, of course. There are also linear actuator systems that can do it automatically for you. I've obviously never played with one, so I can't speak to them, but I do know they exist. I'm also entertaining the idea of adding rear support via cable tension to keep the 4x6 posts under compression, so they're less likely to break if there is some freak massive wind load on the system at some point. Now we move on to the 2000 photo time-lapse to finish everything up. Now I'm curious, do you guys prefer the time-lapse method like this, or the video method where it's sped up in ungodly amounts, like 2500% sometimes, like the prior section? Let me know down in the comments below. And with the super strut added to the frame of the array, we can move on to adding the panels to everything. Before we begin attaching the panels, we want to add our bottom panel mounting clips, which will stop the panels from sliding off when we toss it on. I'm setting the panel clamps 5 3/4 inches from the end. which should be the same distance at both the top and the bottom of the superstrut. I intentionally left the strut a little longer as it gives me something to grab onto if needed for moving the array, as well as keeps the panels further away from the ground at the lowest point. When it comes to adding the panels, you'll find it incredibly easy to leave the array at its lowest point and just toss the panels on and start stacking them. In between each panel, we add 2 panel spacing clamps before adding the next panel. This gives a little bit of space between the panels, as well as clamps the 2 adjoining panels together. As you go up the mount with the panels, you'll find it gets increasingly more difficult as the panels are quite heavy, I believe around 70 pounds. It was at the top panel where I realized I made a poor life choice here. While I could walk up on a ladder with the panel, which is not really safe to do, and chuck it up there, I did not really want to do that. The smart thing to do would be to set the whole array horizontal and toss them up and start clamping them down while it's still horizontal. If you're as dull as I am and decide to wait until you have a few panels on before putting the array horizontal though, you'll find it's now incredibly heavy and quite hard to do. I highly recommend starting at the horizontal point for sure. Hindsight, definitely 20/20 there. When it comes to putting on the last panel, you can either slide it in from the side or lift it over the edge of the superstrut and slide it down. If you do go over the strut route like I did, be careful not to scrape the backside of the panel on the strut, as it will easily damage the panel. Once you have a column completed, you can see it effortlessly bounces out once again. The last thing you'll need to do to finish off a column is to add the end clamps to the panel and tighten it down. It's a fairly straightforward process, just make sure you never torque down any of the clamps beyond hand tight, as the force of the clamps can actually break the panels if you tighten them down too hard. Alright, time to speed through most of the rest of putting these panels on. The easiest way that I found to put them up was to simply just go from the side and toss them on from the side in between pieces of superstrut and then sliding them around to where I needed them to be. I then used a step stool, because I'm short, to tighten down the panel clamps in between each panel. I have a stop block on both the front and rear of my post to make sure that the array cannot tilt either way on me as I lean over the panels to tighten things down. The time lapse doesn't have me putting every single panel on, as I had to step away during this process for a few hours and completed the last bit off camera when it was dark. Obviously, as work is being done here, you should have your OSHA-approved footwear to fully maximize your efficiency while working. With all of the panels on, we can test out our balance of the whole array with everything done. It's not perfectly balanced, as it will fall either direction if it's beyond about 30 degrees, but I'm fine with that. It's still fairly simple to raise and lower with just one hand, though at the extreme angle for wintertime it does take a bit more effort to move. The next and likely final separate video for this array will come out next, where I go over what I'll be doing for the tilt and locking mechanism. I really wanted to have it done by actuators, but I still have more to learn before I can confidently do that and not damage the panels. Maybe one day down the road we'll do it. I was also going to do a video on the math of building this, but I don't know about doing that. If you guys want me to do so, let me know and I can revisit the idea. As always, if you like the content I'm putting out, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content as it comes out. With all 20 of the panels and the superstrut mounted, we need a method to adjust and lock the array. I'll be using this incredibly quick and simple method to be able to adjust the array all by myself and lock its angle. To get started, I want to have a solid surface to attach my mounts to, so I'm just adding a piece of 2x6 that's 6 3/4 inches long to the back of the array. To attach it, I'm just using 6 3.5-inch screws to attach it to the frame. If it ever has any issues, I'll eventually swap it over to lag bolts. For the bracket that holds my punch square tubing, I'm just using a 1.5-inch punched angle iron. I purchased a 12-inch piece and just cut it into 3-inch sections so I'd have 2 sets of brackets, one for the top and one for the bottom. I should have added some sort of measurements for where to place the brackets, but I just kind of eyeballed it to put the punch square tubing in the center. I then added 4 3.5-inch screws with 2 washers each on them to hold the angled brackets in place. Again, lag bolts would obviously be better, and if it ever becomes an issue, I promise I'll swap them out. When it comes to putting the bottom brackets on, I didn't measure where I wanted it to go. I just eyeballed it as well after putting the square stock against the 4x6 post while it was at its maximum extension. I again added a 2x6 by 6 3/4 block to the 4x6 post, so I had plenty of room to attach the brackets to. I should have added a piece of 2x6 on both sides of the post as well, but I didn't do so, mainly because I forgot to do it. That's really it. Once the 2x6 was mounted, I just repeated the same process as the top with attaching the brackets to the 2x6. With the adjustable rod installed, it's the moment of truth to see if it works. After removing my temporary stop block, that is. As we can see, it holds the array without any issue and can mostly easily be moved. Moving the array at the lower point is a bit heavy here. Be better if I was at the very bottom with more leverage.
Hi, yes. You woke up one? Okay, hi. What's up?
The materials used for this simple method was just two 3-foot pieces of punch square stock, one that's 1 inch and one that's 1 1/4 inches, so that they nest together. A 1-foot piece of 1.5 inch angle stock, 3 5/16 inch bolts and nuts to slide into the punch square stock and through the brackets, and then the third one used as the pin to hold your angle. Eventually, when I have an extra set of hands, I'll measure different angles and mark the holes for those respective angles so I can quickly adjust the array to a desired angle without any additional help. With all that said and done though, I believe this will be the end of this solar array video series. I'll toss out a couple more videos for it, I'm sure, such as compilations of all of the parts in one long video, and a super sped up 1-minute version probably. As always, if you like the content I'm putting out, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with all new content as it comes out. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.